small is beautiful. Yeah, so what the Canadians do in Saskatchewan with the small facility there is good. Small recycling facilities is good, and reasonable small output projects are also okay.
So hello and welcome to the Assay Live. I'm here with Thomas Kruemmer, Director at Ginger International Trade and Investment, to talk all about rare earths. Thomas, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so I thought maybe we could start just looking at the supply and demand outlook for the rare earths for the coming midterm. How will, different regulations such as the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act impact these dynamics? What do you see happening right now?
Well, say on rare earths, we are not talking about single element mining, say like copper or nickel or zinc or lithium. We are essentially talking about 15 distinct elements who all have their own distinct applications. So if you want to talk about the rare earth growth, that's very difficult because it's 15 products, going all across the industrial spectrum and medicines and what have you. So the applications of these 15 different products, they change over time with technology and with new developments. So one cannot take things for granted. It's always in flux. So, for example, say 70% of rare earth output are the elements lanthanum and cerium, which in the 19th century were used for public street lighting. For the gas lamps, there was a gas mantle inside, and that contained different compositions over time: lanthanum, cerium, and yttrium and thorium. Thorium is not a rare earth. So with the electrification, this application, of course, disappeared. Nowadays, these two elements would be applied to oil refining, say for gasoline, diesel, but also for catalytic converters for internal combustion engine cars. So you have an idea what this means in terms of electrification of mobility, what the outlook for these two elements is. Then you have, interesting maybe also europium, which used to be in high demand for color TVs, the so-called CRT, cathode ray tube. None of us uses this type of monitor or TV anymore, so the market for that is gone. Then closer to home, there was the samarium cobalt permanent magnet that was developed in the early 1960s. And that was the standard of permanent magnet for almost 20 years. But then there was the civil war in Congo, which drove up cobalt prices. So the search for a replacement of the samarium cobalt permanent magnet was on, and a Japanese scientist achieved what was deemed impossible, to create a permanent magnet based on iron. So what he created was the neodymium iron boron, or NdFeB magnet, which is nowadays the default for high-performance magnets. And that is also where now the most of the demand comes from. You see the neodymium neomagnet or neodymium iron boron magnet contains neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. These four elements are about 22% of production of volume that is produced, but they are 90% of the value of all rare earth compounds combined. So nowadays, if people talk about growing rare earth demand, this is what they refer to. These four elements for the NdFeB magnet. So the growth prospect for this is plus minus 4 to 5% per year. However, one must also say in the medium term, we will not have enough supply to feed that. There was a very, very good seminar by Adamas Intelligence in, I think, November last year, which is still available online, where they laid out in minute detail the impossibility to achieve the objectives of the energy change and electrification of mobility, simply because the raw materials are not there, and they will also not be there in the medium term. So that is roughly the growth situation for rare earths. We must also consider that the NdFeB magnet is mainly produced in China. China has about 90% of the world production of these magnets, and is also well on the way to build capacities. So we have existing capacities plus planned, announced capacities that are almost equivalent to the forecast demand for these magnets for 2030. They have it already now. So that creates a difficult environment for alternative manufacturers to enter this market, because obviously Chinese suppliers will not go down without a fight.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the supply shortages that have been highlighted, and I think that's kind of been noted across a variety of different metals that are key to the energy transition. Do you see new supply coming on, or do you see kind of new rare earths projects in the works?
Oh, yes. Yes, of course, there is feverish activity all over. In the EU, it's more talk. In the US, in Australia, and Canada, it's more action. So I think the next project coming up to produce rare earths, separated rare earths, so the finished product, would be Iluka Resources in Australia, where the government has extended a very sizable loan to enable this project to move forward. The trouble for private investors is they're looking at, say, for the rare earth elements, at a market that is worth globally plus minus $10 billion. And they see that 90% of this and the value addition happens in China. And then they see a runway for a rare earth project, if it's really already well explored and everything, of minimum 5 years and an investment volume of $600 to $800 million. No investor will in his right mind will go after that. So this leaves the governments to do something. So in Australia, the financing of the Iluka project by the Australian government. In Canada, we have the development around the SRC, the Saskatchewan Research Council is building a processing facility for a reasonable quantity of rare earth ore. And the US, where the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense go the unusual way to invest in processing capacity, while it is unclear how they will feed this processing capacity. Yeah, the raw material is still not there. So I really don't know if this is just activism because of the pressure from politicians, or if there is a real master plan behind it. This I cannot judge.
That's interesting. I mean, it kind of brings me to my next question, which was, you know, governments around the world have been pushing for more regionalized supply chains, you know, as a way to kind of get a clear strategy to maintain control over these kind of key metals and minerals. Are you seeing any examples where this is working well? Or, I mean, you just mentioned the US with kind of covering one side, but maybe not the other. Yeah,
Well,
so any kind of interesting examples that you want to
yeah,
share?
so as I mentioned, Australia and Iluka is definitely a bold step forward. And also the development in Canada it's small, but they do something. So the trouble with this is you're creating then products that have no market yet, because there is, as I said, for the magnet production, there are basically no world-size facilities in either the US or Europe. Only Japan has. Japan is fighting a battle against the Chinese domination of the magnet market. Yeah. You would also see liners who invest in an expansion of production, probably also in order to maintain the current overwhelming market share in the magnet materials market outside China. That would be Japan, that would be Vietnam, for example. But also liners have to sell to China. They cannot be commercially successful without selling to China.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons that China has, you know, kind of dominated this industry for so long is partly due to the environmental concerns by a lot of other governments around the world. And so I guess, you know, taking this into consideration, is there a more environmentally friendly way for the industry moving forward in terms of processing for the rare earths?
So I think, you know, in rare earths, that is the result of something that applied to a lot of environmentally difficult production. You see, in the after the 1989 China-wide, nationwide uprising against the government and the following sanctions, China was in a very miserable economic position, and they were attracting investment and were taking whatever they could get. So there would be chemical industries from Taiwan that were environmentally difficult to do in Taiwan, but easy to do in China. There would be all kinds of projects moving to China for simply this reason. Of course, cost also played a role, but environmental regulation at home played a role as well. So in the course of that, also the, for example, 92, I believe, Solvay, or at that time Rhodia, stopped production of or separation of rare earths in La Rochelle, France, because they had accumulated a very, very large stock of radioactive waste, thorium oxide. The numbers that we hear are different, but I believe it's somewhere around 10,000 tons. If used in a nuclear reactor, this would give France electricity for 100 years. So anyway, this was moved to China, and this kind of move was the result. You do not have China only dominating in rare earths for this reason. You also have other products, other chemical products, yeah, which were difficult. Yeah. So then in terms of rare earths, we are not talking about a single resource or single ore and a single process. You have a number of different resources for rare earths, and say on the problematic side, the composition of ionic clay-based rare earth deposits is actually ideal. It is if we could develop these worldwide, this would be really perfect, except for that the quantity is probably not sufficient. The trouble with this is the concentration in the resource is so low, the concentration of rare earths, that there is at this time no commercially feasible way of extracting these other than doing so-called in situ leaching, or you pump an ammonium sulfate solution into the earth and you wash out the rare earths with this solution. What happens, of course, is you burn the soil, and of course it will inevitably leak into the groundwater. So we've seen that recently happening in Myanmar, but China had a huge problem with that in the period between 2010 and 2015, illegal mining using this method. So unless we have some environmentally safe way of extracting these rare earths from ionized clay, this resource is too difficult. Then another one, which is abundantly available and very almost a commodity, would be monazite. The trouble with monazite is it has a significant content of thorium. Thorium is a decay product of uranium. Thorium itself is not such a big problem, but it's the decay product, the isotopes that are radiating. So you need permanent disposal facilities for this type of radioactive waste, which are in the European Union difficult. It's quite strange. In the EU, you have nuclear power plants, which produce eventually also waste, which needs to be stored permanently somewhere. And they have these facilities. I do not have numbers for inside the European Union, but for example, the UK has, I think, storage capacity for more than 200,000 tons of radioactive waste from power plants, from hospitals, and so on. For some reason, there is an unwillingness to also store nuclear waste from rare earth production. In the EU itself, it is totally hopeless. Even recycling is being made difficult or impossible by EU self-made regulation. The bureaucrats and the politicians do not understand that if they regulate one product, that it affects a whole line of other products.
Yeah.
So what is happening is, for example, the EU is going for so-called strategic cooperation. That is, they go to African countries and say, let us strategically cooperate in these products, yeah, meaning you please mine it. All the unfortunate waste that we don't want to have, you keep in your country, and we will take the raw material for our refineries. Yeah, this is, I must say, a very, very cynical approach, because there are resources in the EU which could be used for rare earth processing, but there's the unwillingness to put up with the detrimentals of having that. Yeah, in the EU and in the US, it is somewhat similar. You have rare earth deposits, some of which look actually quite prospective, but it's the same thing. There's only one company in the US that is a private company that is allowed to permanently dispose of nuclear waste, and that is Energy Fuels. Energy Fuels have to wrestle with the federal environmental authority and also with the local one, and both don't speak the same language. You know, it's very, very difficult for Energy Fuels. So having the idea to base on domestic production of rare earths and then creating a value chain attached to that contains a lot of wishful thinking.
Interesting. And I mean, how you've kind of explained a lot of the environmental toll. How do you separate this with the need for the rare earths within kind of new technologies and the energy transition?
I think one should go back to the Paris Agreement, which contains 17 times the term sustainable development.
Okay.
This was put in there because it implies sustainable growth. To say, you know, we can all grow, we only change the energy resources that we use, and then we can go on consuming as before. Had they not implied this, a lot of countries would not have signed. Say, developing countries, they want to develop, they want to grow, and you cannot deny them growth. But, you know, on a planet with 8 billion people, growth cannot be sustainable in itself. The only sustainable thing to do would be thrift, and this is something that you cannot offer to developing countries. And also, we have no model under which, economic model under which zero economic growth works. Yeah. So one way or another, we have to go down this road. And that means, in effect, that things have to become worse before they become better. So our carbon contribution to the environment is unlikely to drop in the medium term. We'll have to increase it before we can decrease it. And that's the same basically for all mining products. I mean, copper, for example, if you take copper connectors, a normal internal combustion engine car also has copper connectors, but an electric vehicle has 5 times as many. I don't know how this is for copper cables, but I also expect that this is much larger there. Yeah. So I think we have very little choice than to cause more environmental damage before we can reduce it.
Very interesting. I guess my last question is really just kind of the way forward for the industry. Any insights you want to share on developments or anything that our audience should be looking out for?
Well, as I mentioned, the development in Australia is very ambitious, and also in Canada. I would personally think that small is beautiful. To say, you know, somebody who comes up and says, I will produce 5,000 tons or 4,000 tons of neodymium, praseodymium oxide per year, he will have to answer the question, where do you sell it? Because there is no metal manufacturer and no manufacturer of magnets who needs this quantity outside China. So this is something that needs to be observed. We should go step by step. We should not try to just break into the market with something oversized and then find out that it will be ruined economically. Yeah, there's also what must not be underestimated is the long runway that most projects have. There is precious little that come up within a few years. You know, Iluka happens to have the resource on big stacks piled in Western Australia, so it has already been mined. It is there. It can be used. But the same is not true for all the other rare earth hopefuls out there. It's still buried in the ground. It still needs to get out there. There needs to be a hydrometallurgy plant, and there has to be the separation of rare earths, all of which will not function from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds. You know, there will be a lot of trial and error. Give you an example for cost save. I will not name the company, but for cost saving reasons, you know, a facility for separation of rare earths was built using pipes and tubes and pumps of mild steel. But what you are using there in order to extract the rare earths are the most aggressive acids known to man. resulting in the pipes and the pumps lasting for only 3 days. You know, there was a great learning experience that you have to use alloys and you have to use surface coated equipment. You cannot just expose mild steel to it. It will rust within days, literally. Yeah. So all this requires a learning curve. Yeah, and so nothing will run from 0 to 100 in 3 seconds. So small is beautiful. Yeah, so what the Canadians do in Saskatchewan with the small facility there is good. Small recycling facilities is good, and reasonable small output projects are also okay. Yeah, the trouble is commercial viability.
Absolutely. That's really interesting, and certainly quite a bit to take in for, I suppose, some, you know, an industry that's not as well understood by a lot of people. So thank you so much for your insights today.
Welcome. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.